My name is Mike Brown. I am a horticulturist. For those who don't know me, I have a background in entomology and 20 some odd years in horticulture. I know a lot about plants. I know a lot about insects and design, and I also do consulting at your home. Today we're going to talk about the right plants. I'm going to give you a list of my plants that I've used over the last 10 years and have seen the best results, the least amount of maintenance, the least amount of taxing the environment. And I'll talk a little bit about those plants. We're going to cover some trees. We also have flights that come around every now and then to interrupt me. Trees and shrubs, we're going to talk a lot about, and some ornamental grasses for the landscaping. So that way we'll figure out some ideas based on those, on placement in your projects, also how those plants are going to mature, how they're going to look in 5 years. So you don't have to hire an arborist every 2 years to come in and trim your trees up. So what I do want to mention is this is all probably 7 of my top favorite trees. And I'll give you a little background on each one and my experience with them. The Palo Verde Desert Museum is a cultivar. There's many different types of Palo Verdes. The common name, the botanical name is Parkinsonia. So if you called up a nursery and say, I want a Palo Verde, and you're not specific with your cultivar, as in Desert Museum, it does the best here in Los Angeles County and Palm Springs. You'll end up with probably one of many different types of Palo Verdes. So one of them gets really huge and grows extremely fast. I always stick to the Desert Museum because I've used it in the landscape. I've seen it in Palm Springs where it gets 120 degrees. And also I've seen it out in Palm Springs when it gets down into the 20s and 30s. So it does really well under diverse soil conditions, really poor soil conditions, and extreme weather fluctuations, heat and cold. So the Palo Verde Desert Museum is one of my favorites to use in the landscaping. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't completely block the view. It sort of screens it for you. You can still get wind circulation through, which is important. And it has beautiful yellow, kind of like scrambled egg flowers most of the year. Spring and summer proliferately, but most of the year it will have some yellow flowers on it. The leaves are very tiny, and it may go deciduous, meaning it may drop those little tiny leaves, but it only takes a few weeks or a month or so before it flushes out another foliage on it as well. So the Desert Museum, if you're looking for architecture, I would suggest getting a multi-trunk, so you've got a couple of different angles of this tree growing out. You can also do what we call standard, which is a single trunk tree. So if you're ordering the Palo Verde, Desert Museum is your cultivar. You want a standard, which is single trunked, or do you want a multiple trunk so that you can light that thing up with different types of lighting elements? The other thing that's important is placement of the tree. So if your property is, say, 20 feet by 30, that's 600 square feet. The best placement of this type of tree on a one-story home would be at least 10 to 12 feet away from the house. Because it does branch out broadly, 15 to 20 feet, and it gets about 15 to 20 feet in height. So it's kind of 20 by 20 is usually where that tree tops out. It does get bigger in certain locations depending on water, depending on the soil. If the soil is a little healthier, a little more organic, it'll probably get a little bit bigger. You can also prune it, but don't go crazy with pruning it so much or having your gardener prune it. I would sit back and look at this tree and see where you need to reduce the canopy. Just going in and cutting it just for the sake of cutting it, what happens ends up bringing lots of new growth wherever there's been a cut. So selectively look at where you want to reduce the limb or remove the limb. If it's out over the sidewalk and you see it's heading out over the sidewalk, I would cut it back to the trunk. If it's headed towards the house, cut it back to the trunk, because if you didn't, what's going to happen is it's going to start branching out this way again. So look at the tree. Placement is important. and also the scaffolding and the limbs and the way the tree is growing is very important. Most of them in 24-inch boxes run you about $250 to $300, and that size tree will be planted about 8 feet tall already by 8 to 10 feet wide, so it's a fairly large size tree in a 24. The next size up is a 36-inch box tree, which will be 12 feet in height by about 12 feet in width. Price goes up extremely, probably almost double that, so you're looking at $500 for a 36-inch box. Or you can go down to a 15-gallon, which is one size lower than a 24, and those you can get about 4 or 5 feet in height. Again, they grow relatively fast, and you can get a 15-gallon for about 130 bucks. Okay, so if you're looking for the Palo Verde Desert Museum, is one of the better ones. It does really great here in Los Angeles. One of my second choices is the Arbutus marina, also called the strawberry tree.
These are all trees, right?
Yes, we're going over trees right here in the landscaping. The Arbutus has a really beautiful red, kind of burgundy exfoliating bark, and it has a pink flower followed by yellow and red edible fruit called the strawberry. Tastes a little bit like a strawberry, but I would only eat it if I was starving because it really has kind of a little aftertaste, maybe lots of sugar. I can show you pictures in here, but they don't do the plant justice, but this is a really good book to have if you don't have it. It will give you specifics on taking care of those trees, pruning, soil, just what I'm going over for you now. The Arbutus marina. Now the reason I put in the marina is there's a couple of other cultivars that get extremely huge. So if you have a single-story home, or even a two-story home, the marina is already going to top out at about 18 feet. So there's the height of that 18 by about 15 height in width. Again, it looks really beautiful when it's lit from underneath. So think about whether you want to do a multiple stemmed or you want to do a single standard trunk Arbutus. Again, 12 feet away from the house. Not that the roots are invasive. In fact, none of these have invasive roots, but you want to keep it away from the house so you don't have to do any extensive pruning in the first couple of years. If you're into olives, the Manzanillo, M-A-N-Z-A-N-I-L-L-O, is a cultivar of olives that grows really fast. It has a beautiful silver green foliage on it. It's beautiful, but also if you're looking to not have a big mess of olives, get the non-fruiting olive. You can request a non-fruiting olive tree. If you want to pickle and make your own olives, then that's a lot of work. It's also a big mess, but the birds seem to like it, so you're feeding nature.
We have a big one in our front yard. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do.
And
huge.
Huge, and it is actually over one of my cars. I can't park there.
Yeah, yeah. So the roots on that are not invasive, especially if it's planted correctly in the right place. If you plant it too close to the sidewalk or too close to the house or the driveway, in about 30 years, I mean, it does grow fast, but if you're there for, 20 years or so, the tree will get huge. The trunk gets a beautiful, old kind of architectural base to it. Again, multiple trunk or single trunk. You can buy them in that, or you can buy the fruiting or non-fruiting. That's really annoying back there, so I will try and keep my voice above that, or I'll go turn their saw off. So, Manzanillo olive, non-fruiting. There's also a beautiful shrub olive called the little ollie. If you're looking for something kind of, let's say you want to kind of keep the same theme going on your property, in your design, and you're doing olive trees, maybe you do the little ollie shrubs. They get about 5 feet wide, 5 feet in height, and they can be kind of mounded. I mean, they kind of a globe shape anyway. But they stay relatively short, and they're a great shrub, and it has the same leaf, the same color. You could use that in the landscaping, or even as a semi-screening on a property. Okay, so that's the olive manzanillo tree, or the little ollie shrub. Now, 5 gallons on the little ollie shrub will run you about $18 to $20. When you plant them, plant them about 5 feet apart because they'll get 5 feet wide. And you don't, unless you want a big mass of them, they look really nice when they've got space between the plants.
Which one is this? I'm sorry.
That would be the little ollie. So if I were going to plant a little ollie here, I'd give myself 5 feet away so they have room to grow. So if I'm doing, my house is here, I'd keep it about 5 feet away from the house. And then I would stagger the plant so that you can see it from the street as a dimension as opposed to planting them all in a single line. I'll give you a little design tips here. You can do them like that so they become dimensional, and it kind of creates a little sense of movement and a little sense of fluidity in the design as opposed to everything lining up across the house. I kind of do that a lot in my landscape work just to kind of break things up. But you definitely want to give them 5 feet apart on the little ollie shrubs. On the olive trees, again, 10 to 12 feet away from the house. And if you have power lines, phone lines going across your property, keep them away from that because they will grow up into that. And you'll have to prune them eventually, or the city will. So look overhead before you're planting any tree near that area, okay? Sidewalks, driveways, and these are non-invasive roots, so you just want to keep them sort of centered in the middle of the property. The acacias, there's so many acacias. If you called a nursery and said, I want an acacia, they would probably go, we have 200 types of acacias. Some of them are monsters. Some of them get probably 75 feet in height by 45 feet in width, which is now taking over your neighborhood. So if you want an acacia, I have many favorites. I couldn't list them all on here. The Acacia Baileyana has a beautiful kind of purple-gray leaf to it with a stunning yellow flower. Like the Palo Verde Desert Museum, all of your acacias have yellow flowers. So it's a beautiful yellow flower on a purple-gray foliage, which looks stunning when it blooms. This acacia can top out at about 35 feet height by 30 feet in width. So you only need one if you have a small property. If you have a big rolling piece of property with horse ranches and whatever, then you could probably do more than one. But think about if you look and research your tree at maturity, some of these trees can get there relatively fast, and if you're there for 5 to 10 years, you're going to be looking at some pruning at some point down the road if you're going to sell your house because the tree may make it look like it's overgrown or the house may be dwarfed. So look at the maturity height on your trees before you purchase, and look at if they're going to be deciduous. Yeah, some of these Palo Verdes...
Before you purchase or before you sell?
Before you purchase any of these trees, you want to do your research.
Okay. I think with the house.
Yeah, do your research so that you know that it's not going to become deciduous if in fact you're trying to screen something across the street or of that nature. A lot of deciduous trees only remain that way for a month or two here. Okay.
Do all these trees have the same watering needs?
They do. This is all Southern California landscape choices, and this is what I use in my designs.
So how often do you have to water these guys?
Let me get through these, and then we'll talk about that and talk about maintenance on that. I just want to kind of give you an idea.
Yep.
But good question. The other acacia I wanted to mention is the Stenophylla. It's like it's called shoestring acacia. It's a beautiful, if you like the weeping willow trees, you're going to love the acacia Stenophylla. It's just like a weeping willow. It requires a lot less water than a weeping willow. It has the same kind of look. The leaves are fairly long, slender, almost like bean pod length, if you will. And they sort of droop. This tree can get fairly large. So again, if you have a small property, you might want to move it further away from the house. If you're trying to screen something, it will definitely screen whatever you want to hide quickly. It grows very fast. I think this tree can top out at about 40 feet in height by 30 feet in width. But that means you can still trim all of these trees. They don't have to remain that height. The idea, I think, in the beginning is when you purchase your tree, if you have the opportunity to look at the tree in the nursery, look at how the tree is going to be growing. Because if you have a tree that's got a multiple trunk like this, I'm really horrible at sketching, so and then you've got a limb that grows back in towards the tree, I would probably not purchase that tree. You want to have your limbs, your scaffolding, not so close together. You don't want to have them rubbing against each other or growing back in, because you're going to have to trim that. So choose your trees. You can look and see, kind of get an idea how that tree is going to look in 5 years. Main trunk, 2 limbs going this way and 1 small one that way lets me know that there's going to be a lot of weight on this side of the tree in about 5 years. If I don't prune, or if I say, I'm going to look at this one, this tree looks a little bit better. Not that it's less healthy, there's going to be a lot less maintenance and problems with that. So look at the distribution of the weight of the tree, the health of the tree. Does it have any wounds on it, like someone backed the forklift into it and put a gash in the trunk and you just picked the tree up because it looked pretty and you didn't realize until you got home and you went, oh, it'll be okay? It might be okay, but what happens is that the tree ends up at some point having potential to absorb bacteria or even leaving it open for insects. So look at the tree thoroughly, the health. If you can, look into a 15-gallon. You can pull those out, usually of the 15-gallon, and if it's root bound, I would probably look at another tree. And you can also tell, generally, in a 24-inch box, if something is root bound, you'll see lots of surface roots. I'm really picky when it comes to buying a tree. If they have many to choose from, I try to use all those factors. If it's root bound and I can tell, I don't buy a root bound tree. If it's off balance, if it has any kind of structural damage, if there's anything that looks like it's been chewing on the leaves of it, it's indication of an insect perhaps, maybe it's seasonal, maybe I won't buy that, but if it's seasonal, it may happen at your home anyway, unless you spray. And then look at how you think the tree might mature in the landscaping. And if you put that in your property, how big is it going to be, say in 5 years, 10 years? What is my maintenance going to be? Just to give you an idea of what a tree pruner or arborist charges to prune trees when they're 20 to 30 feet tall, can start at $1,000. And usually every couple of years, 2 or 3 years, you may have to do that. So think about the maintenance, the cost of that. Just because the tree has beautiful yellow flowers, I would do a little research and find out what I'm going to be getting myself involved in. It's like buying a car. Oh, it's a beautiful BMW, but you know, repairs on BMWs are very expensive. You don't know that until you get one. I don't know, but just so you know. Those are some of my top favorite trees. And on this side, I've got 2 more, and then I will talk a little bit about water habits on these here. And then we'll talk about shrubs and grasses. There's a really cool tree. It's called African sumac, S-U-M-A-C. That's the common name. If you called up a nursery and said, I want an African sumac, they probably would know what you're talking about. If you called up the nursery and said, I want a ruse, R-H-U-S, they would not know because there's many types of ruse. There's one native Californian called intrigifolia. Ruse intrigifolia. I love that word. It's like, let's try and spell that. But the Lancia, it has a lance. Lancia comes from the name because it has a lance-shaped leaf, very curved, thin, almost like the Acacia cinephylla. So it has like a little shoestring leaf. Beautiful tree, grows really fast. It looks really pretty as a single because it really is kind of a lollipop-shaped tree, meaning not so formed, circular, but it does have that kind of look. The Ruse Lancia African sumac is about 25 feet tall by 15 to 18 feet wide. So it has this kind of lollipop-shaped tree to it. Beautiful tree though, very, very fast-growing tree. For those who want a tree that does go deciduous based on foliage, the redbuds. There's the eastern redbud, the Cercis, has a beautiful heart-shaped. There's many cultivars of redbuds. One is called the tansy. Is it tansy? Hold on. It's either. Hold on one second. C-E-R. There is. Let's see how many Cercis we have here. And I apologize for not knowing all of those names. Here we go. Redbud. Hearts of Gold is gorgeous. The leaves are in all of the Cercis. The leaves are heart-shaped. The Hearts of Gold is like a chartreuse green. with a purple flower in the springtime. So you get a beautiful combination of these beautiful lime green leaves with these purple lavender flowers that grow on the bark, on the trunk and on the stem of the tree. So unlike most trees, where we get our foliage on the ends of the limbs and flowers, the redbud trees produce their flowers along the trunk and on the limbs of the tree in early springtime. So the bigger the tree is, the more stately it's going to appear. And then it produces the foliage. On the hearts of gold, it's a beautiful lime green, chartreuse colored leaf.
And the height of that one?
The hearts of gold, let's see what they say. And FYI, just in this book alone, it looks like there's 50 different types of redbuds. So there's lavender twist, hearts of gold. It does not give me a height on that. Most of these, 25 to 35 feet in height. So on a two-story home, it'd be perfect. On a single-story home, maybe off to the corner, so it kind of balances it, balances the property a little bit. In front, it might sort of dwarf the house. There is the Ace of Hearts, not to be confused with the Hearts of Gold, that only grows 12 feet by 15. 12 feet in height by 15 feet in width. So as a patio tree, that would be perfect. It does go deciduous. It does have the same kind of green, lime green leaves with purple flowers, and it stays much smaller. The one I was thinking about is called Forest Pansy. The leaves, same leaf shape, but they're purple. When they open up, they're purple. Then they turn to a darker green as it matures. The same purple lavender flowers. Check out the Cercis redbuds. It really is a great tree investment for your property. Low water, does not need a lot, but that does not mean in the beginning that you don't continue watering it until it gets established. And what established means is that at the nursery, they're watering these trees probably 2 or 3 times a week because they have to sell the trees to us. We get them, we put them in our property, we do drip line around them, and we run it 3 times a week maybe. But are we getting a 24-inch box root ball water to the bottom? We have to double check, and I was talking about this last week, but I have these today. So it's important to know that you're getting all of that root ball watered, okay? Because the nursery guys are doing it. They're just standing there watering and moving on to the next one. We get them, and then we end up putting it on drip, and maybe we're not giving it enough. Usually about a year. It takes a good year for those trees to sort of be weaned off of being staked up if they need to be staked. Also, any supplemental watering during huge periods of drought like we have now, I would probably deep water those trees at least once a week with a hose on top of the drip.
After they're established?
No.
Oh.
Until they're established. Until they're established, you would probably want to do deep watering weekly on top of your drip irrigation. If you're in doubt, run your probe down in the soil before you turn the hose on, and you can go, okay, the soil's still wet. I don't need to water today. And that's an indication. And that's going to save your investment on the tree. It's going to cut back on the water, and it's going to help you know exactly where the water's going and how much it's going. Yes.
I'm still a little confused on that instrument. I can see what it's doing, but only if you've got this, it's supposed to be this much watering at the bottom, and that's only going to be showing.
This goes down about 15 inches. So I still have about another 6 inches to go. So if in fact I'm running this into my soil and it's wet that far down, and you want to get another 4 or 5 inches below, turn your irrigation on a little bit more, or you can get a PVC pipe, 3/4 inch, run it into the ground next to your tree, and then run a bamboo or a stick. So in other words, if you're like for example, one of these here, I would have a 3-inch PVC tubing right next to my tree, going down 4 feet. And then I'd have a piece of bamboo that I could run down in there.
And 4 feet is deep enough?
Yes, that's 4 times 12 is, yeah, plenty, because a 24-inch box is only 2 feet. So if you really want to get technical about that, you could do that. But otherwise, I would use my soil probe, and run the drip irrigation probably another 2-3 minutes more. If you really wanted to be serious about it, and do that 3/4 inch PVC. When you plant the tree, run that into the ground and have yourself a piece of bamboo that you could put down, like testing your oil in your car. You run down in there, you can water it, and you pull it up and you see if it's wet or if the soil is moist. It's the best way to do that. Also, keeping mulch around your plant base keeps the soil moist as well. Okay?
Last week we were talking about wrapping the drip line around the tree instead of going straight line.
Yes.
Is that applies to trees and your ficus shrubs?
Absolutely. You can run that around there as many times as you want.
So then when I left here last week, I looked around my whole property, a straight line, drip line, and I looked at all the little trees and bigger bushes and whatever. And I realized that the holes in my drip line aren't necessarily right on the trunk. They're in between. Maybe that's because the roots are growing out this way, right? Like you don't want to necessarily water the trunk, or you do want to water the trunk?
Well, you know, that happens when your plants go in the ground, is when you put the irrigation. These are your plants, right? Mm-hmm. You're running your irrigation, weaving it in and out,
that's what you're suggesting.
Or wrapping it around like this, depending on the size of the plants. So, you know, what's the health of your plants right now? Do they look healthy?
I put in, like about a year and a half ago, additional ficus to fill in the gaps, you know, just because I can still see my neighbors, and some of them just didn't shoot up.
It could be a combination of water, nutrition, soil, or maintenance, or also the health of the plant when it was purchased. So again, if you're purchasing a ficus and you're in control of what you're buying, look at the shrub or the tree and decide at that point if it looks healthy or not, based on those things I mentioned earlier. The trunk, the health, how the foliage looks. The things that you're in control of is the water, the nutrition, and the soil, okay? So those are the factors that you are left dealing with. And also, did I say nutrition? Yes, nutrition. So you are in control of that.
And we'll talk about nutrition.
We're going to try and cover, I have a ton to cover in an hour and a half. So it's up here. We'll try and hit some big points on nutrition, absolutely. But, yes, you can run the drip line around the base of your tree several times. Again, I still want to know, am I getting these roots 24 inches down that I just planted wet with water? Now we have rain coming sometime, and when that happens, we can turn that drip irrigation completely off. This helps on smaller plants. On bigger plants, you can buy a tree probe. It costs a couple $100. And what you do, it has a similar to this, but what it is, it has a little indentation, and it's like a shovel. You run it into the ground. It goes down about 3 feet, and you pull it out, and it pulls out a big soil plug, and you can tell if it's wet or if it's dry. And you can also tell a lot of times the type of soil that is down there. If you didn't plant the tree and you didn't have first-hand knowledge of that, it was all organic or not organic soil, it will pull the soil out, and you'll be able to look at that and go, okay, this soil is really void in organic matter, and your tree's starting to show stress. Maybe it needs nutritional feeding or more organic soil.
Last week you were talking about mulch on top of these, and you mentioned your favorite was small pine bark.
Yes, you can buy any bark.
Small bark.
Home Depot has it $4.99 a two.
Pine?
Pardon me?
Pine? Actual pine?
Pine, redwood.
Oh, redwood's everywhere.
Yeah.
I was asking when I want the pine. Okay.
So yeah, you just have to let them know what you want. But Home Depot sells lots of mulch by the bag. So where was I? I'm sorry.
Sorry.
What was my last statement? I was saying something about. So run your drip irrigation around it, and that soil probe you can buy at Ewing Irrigation if you want one. If you're investing a lot of money into trees, probably it's a good idea to have one of those, but you won't need it all the time. So you might be able to rent one. I don't know if they rent those at the rental places where they sell landscape material. So check into that. Okay. So we talked about the redbud, the Bauhinia in March in Los Angeles, the big orchid, purple, pink flowers that you see lining the streets. The city plants a lot of these. The Bauhinia typically is a tropical tree, but it will do well under drought conditions. There is a it's also called the pink orchid tree. Patio tree that probably, I would say it looks best as a single trunk, standard tree. 15 feet wide by about 18 feet in height. It's a pretty small tree. But in bloom, it is stunning. And I know you've probably seen in the springtime, there's the Hong Kong orchid, the Bauhinias. They're beautiful. So if you're looking for flowers in your garden, this is a great tree. Again, it does come from Mexico and the tropics, and it would complement your environment here, and it takes a lot of different types of soil. Obviously, if the city's planting them along the parkways, they're not out there, I'm sure, amending the soil or doing any irrigation for that matter. So the Bauhinias are great. Let me read you just a couple of quick points on the Bauhinia. Let's see, B-A-H, here we go. Just so you know, in this book, if you're ever looking for bamboo, 1, 2, I think there's 6 pages of bamboo in here. That's just some bamboo that you can buy in California. That's not every bamboo on the planet. So there's tons of bamboo. Let's see, Bauhinia. I just want to read you something about this plant because it really is, if they have it in here. B-A-H. Okay, here it is. There's the flower on it right there. Very large, pink, lavender flower. And it is, there's 2 types that I recommend. One is the Blackiana, B-L-A-K-E-A-N-A. And it includes many zones in California, 13, 19, 21, 23, and 24. 15 to 20 feet in height, 15 to 20 feet in width. The other ones get a little bit larger. There's a variegated one as well. So again, make sure you get the right cultivar, in particular with the flower and also the height at maturity as well. Bauhinia. And it also tells us sun, full sun, moderate to regular water, so it's not drought tolerant. It would probably do fine. Wherever you're planting that tree would need to be on its own drip irrigation or its own zone. So if you're planting non-drought tolerant plants or you already have them, that might be something that you just add to that zone. That's going to get more water than, say, the rest. Okay? Shrubs. Favorite shrubs. My favorite that I've seen that does really well is the Ceanothus family, the manzanitas, the salvias, artemisias, and I always do a rosemary because, well, why not have a rosemary in the garden? It's always great. Ceanothus. Has anyone have a Ceanothus in their property right now? If you like lilac, we can't really grow super good lilacs here, but it's also known commonly as the California lilac. Ceanothus come in many different shapes and forms. Shrubs, small trees, and ground cover. Ground cover meaning it stays low to the ground and it covers the ground. The shrubs can get up to about, depending on the cultivar, 8 to 10 feet. I think the one that does, if you're looking for a small tree in a Ceanothus, I would go with the, let me find it here. Here we go. And again, if you're looking for Ceanothus, there's 2 whole pages of cultivars of Ceanothus. So if you find a picture you really like, get the name, get that botanical name, because that's what the nursery is going to know. If you say Ceanothus, you could end up with anything. So the one that I like after Julia Phelps, because someone had hybridized this plant, probably had some relation to her.
Do you have a picture of that?
No, there's no picture in here, but you can Google this, Google image it. It will give us some height information on it. Julia Phelps, 7 feet in height, so it's a large shrub, but not out of control, by 7 feet in width to 9 feet in width. So it's kind of wider than it is taller. It has very small green leaves that are evergreen, so you don't have to worry about it dropping foliage. And the flowers are dark indigo, so it's a dark cobalt blue. Beautiful. The one that I use also along with that is the Ray Hartman. It gets 20 feet in height by 15 feet in width. So that would be a small tree. The Ray Hartman is blooms in the spring. All these bloom in the springtime. It's a little bit more of a medium blue. So it has a kind of a sky blue, whereas the Julia Phelps is a dark indigo blue. And this is the only picture. Yes, well there's many. I don't know which one you have there.
I'll just put Julia Phelps plant.
If that's the Julia Phelps, that would be the color, absolutely. That's the flower there. If you want to, you can show them that as well. So in bloom, it's the whole shrub is prolific in blooms. Julia Phelps is a darker blue. The Ray Hartman is a lighter blue. There's even one that's white. It's called Snow Flurry. That's the one that grows in the Santa Monica mountain range wild. That blooms in the springtime. It looks like snow all over these shrubs. So that would be very pretty in the landscaping because it's already native here. So the Snow Flurry would be a great addition to that cobalt blue or that light blue Ray Hartman shrub. So those are great plants to use. Ceanothus, the ground cover one that I use is called Pigeon Point. Is the cultivar. Also, Diamond Heights. Sounds like a novel or something, doesn't it? Jacqueline Suzette novel, Diamond Heights. But those grow pretty wide. They'll get about 8 to 10 feet long by only a foot in height. On a hillside with moderate shade, they do really well. Full sun, they might burn. So a little bit of shade is probably needed on those two cultivars there.
And the Julia Phelps is also not direct sunlight, or is direct sunlight?
You could probably do better if you're in the valley to give them a little bit of shade or a little bit of protection from especially late afternoon sun. Morning sun is fine. South exposure, west exposure, full sun all day might be a little touchy. So check if you can give it a little bit of shading. That's the best one I would do. Manzanitas, the same thing as a ceanothus. There's ground covers, there's shrubs, there's trees. It's really sold for that red exfoliating bark, almost like the arbutus. Now you can get the arbutus as a tree and a shrub we talked about earlier, but if you cannot find the manzanita, that's always a second choice because the arbutus is so much easier to find than a lot of the manzanitas. Manzanitas are much more expensive because they're very slow growing. The arbutus marina we talked about earlier grows really fast. So if you're looking for that red kind of exfoliating bark to kind of complement the home, I would go with the arbutus. If you really want to put some money into it and also have have time for this to grow in, most of your manzanitas are very slow growing. Hence the pricing of those are much higher.
Can any of these be put in a big pot?
Only if you have extremely good drainage. These are all drought tolerant plants, so if you put them in a pot and it's been raining for 3 days in a row and you only have 2 drainage holes in the bottom, guess what? That water is going to, that soil is going to stay wet for a long time. So those plants are going to be sitting in a wet soil. In the mountains here, water runs off or it percolates through. But in a pot where you only have 2 drainage holes, you might want to think about adding more drainage holes before you put in drought-tolerant plants. But that's a good question. And some do better than others. But for the most part, I would say
Julia Phelps, no.
Big pot.
Okay.
Lots of drainage holes. And definitely cactus mix soil. You want the water to get through the profile quickly. If you're using potting soil or potting mix or compost, it's all got lots of water retention matter in there, and it sits in there with 2 drainage holes, and you just spent $150 on a Julia Phelps. I think it's probably would not make it. There's always possibilities, but I think I'd probably put it in the ground. Good question though. The salvias, there are many salvias. These are just 3 of my favorites. Clevelandia, I think I talked about last week, the Leucantha, and the Apiana. The Apiana is the white sage that you can run through your house and get out the evil spirits or bring in the good spirits. It's a beautiful plant. It has a silvery white, almost white silvery gray leaf, extremely fragrant. if the wind can blow through that, and you can smell the oils and the sage and that apiana. It does not do well in full blazing sun. It needs a little bit of, I think it does better with a little bit of shade, not full shade though, definitely a little bit of dappled sunlight. Soils are fine, you don't have to do anything crazy with soils. In fact, all of these salvias here. The Clevelandii would look really great if you're doing ceanothus, because the ceanothus, especially the Julia Phelps, which is that dark indigo blue, and you did the Salvia Clevelandii, which is a sky blue, with a Ray Hartman, which is kind of a medium range blue. Throw in some lavender. You've got this in olive trees. You've already created this beautiful design of grays and purples, and it really makes a small property look bigger when you've got 2 or 3 plant choices and 2 or 3 colors repeated. When you start adding lots of color to a small property, it looks busier. It makes the property look smaller. Not to say that you can't, it's a personal choice, but I have a tendency to kind of go with monochromatics on smaller properties. It looks bigger, it looks nicer in my opinion, a lot less maintenance to deal with, and not a lot of plants don't have to worry about competition. A lot of plants that you end up planting because you love this, you love that, you end up going, well, this one grew over that one, so I got to take it out, and you don't want to be doing a lot of that maintenance unless you enjoy being in the garden all the time. But so, just looking at this Clevelandii, sky blue, and the flower looks like this. It has a little bit of these little whorls like this, and then it has leaves that come out here, and then it comes off of the big shrub like this, and then you'll get more of them like that. These little round tufts. Now there's another plant that looks like that you can use in the landscaping that's stunning. It's orange. It's called Leonotis. It does the same thing. So you got the blue and the orange, which are opposing colors on the wheel that look really nice if you really want to add a little color to those purples and mauves and silvery gray. You could punctuate that in the design with the Leonotis. And that's spelled Leonitis, I believe. And it's also, it has another name to it. Let me give you that one and show you the flower on it. I use it a lot, and you can cut it back to the ground after it blooms. In fact, all of these, not the Ceanothus romantica, but the salvias and the Leonotis, after they bloom and get real leggy, cut them back to about 1.5 feet. What you want to do is this, and then I'm going to show you the picture. So you have your plant that's growing like this, and has all these beautiful flowers on it. Okay? If this is the Salvia leucantha, expect it to be 5 feet wide by 4 feet in height. That's a big plant. It's at least this tall and that wide. Now after it flowers, it gets top heavy and the plant sort of kind of weeps down a little bit. Go through here after it blooms, usually in January, February. Cut all that off. So now your plant is 1 foot by 1 foot.
Is that the same with Mexican sage?
Which Mexican sage now? Because a lot of plants get called Mexican sage. Do you have a name to it for it?
I have it in
Yeah. The botanical name would be helpful, because a lot of times people will say, oh, I have Mexican sage, and they're like, okay, that's this. So the common names get misused a lot, unfortunately. So that's why I try to do this, so there's nothing confusing. If you want to email me that, I can let you know.
Perfect.
So yes, most sages can be cut back to here. The reason being is because now we cut it back after it blooms, is that the sunlight is now able to penetrate down into the plant, down into here, where you have all these dormant buds, and it flushes back out.
So if right now it's leggy and falling, you wait, leggy falling out, still wait till January, February?
If you are, say, 75% post-bloom, say it's almost, you'll know when the plant is, when the flowers start to shrivel up and die. If it's really looking bad, cut it back in 6 weeks, less. I just cut, I have a client in Glendale on a hillside. We planted the leucanthas in March. By July, they were 5 feet by 5 feet on drip irrigation. no fertilizer, a lot of mulch to keep the weeds at bay and also keep the soil moist. I went in there September and they were just too big. I mean, they had gotten so big and they were starting to get leggy. Cut them back. October, November, we're in mid-November, 2 months. They're already this tall again. They're already 2.5 to 3 feet tall because that sunlight was getting down into the basal, producing basal growth in here, and they just went crazy. If you just kept them year-round, what would happen? You'd get new growth coming in there, but you wouldn't get the sunlight able to get down in there, and you'd have all these leggy pieces with new pieces, and the plant just looks bad. So don't be afraid to cut them back. Now, or usually they start to sort of fade back around January, but if they're doing it now, cut them back. They'll be blooming again for you in January, most likely. Yes.
So when you do an installation for a client, is that part of your service that you go back in a couple of months and just eyeball it? Or is that something like a maintenance package that people buy?
Yeah, most of my clients, when I consult, I do, I subcontract the labor, and they will call me and ask me to come in and oversee, you know, their investment. I want you to, can you come in every 3 months and just take a look? And they pay for that service, but I go in and I will suggest to their gardener, or I'll do it myself, and cut back things like that that they don't have time for, or they didn't know about, or they just, you know, want to know how to take care of it. So yes. But all of these salvias can be cut back. All your ornamental grasses, which I'm going to get into, can be cut back. The Salvia leucantha is a beautiful purple. It's almost the color of that purple jacket on the chair there. It's this dark blue, I mean dark, dark purple. The leucantha is the same color as this ink here. This is sky blue, this is purple. The Apiana is kind of, it has a little bit of a yellowish beige flower, not noted for its flower, but noted for its emollient oils that you use in the foliage. These two are awesome to plant together. And this Leonotis, pictured. There you go. I knew I'd get off on a tangent here. Okay, I know you've seen this. I'll see if I can get out here. You guys seen that flower, the Leonotis? The Salvia clevelandii has the same flower, like a little whorl of blue with the orange planted near it. Now this becomes a monster too. Same thing with the salvias. Once it goes out of bloom, get rid of all that. Cut it back. Just don't be afraid to cut your plants back. Just
Leucanthias too?
all of those. 3 of those. 1, 2, 3, and the Leonotis. Cut it back down to about a foot.
Can you do that with lavender too?
Lavender in the beginning, if it starts, well, here's what happens with lavender. First couple years it looks great. And then it starts getting leggy, and then you say, oh, I'm not going to trim it, and that's when you should trim it, when it starts looking leggy. Once it becomes really grown out, the problem with lavender, if you cut it back too far to the hardwood, it will not flush back out. Unlike this, because the plant will do this. If you've got all these pieces of trunk on your lavender, and this is all your foliage, and say it's been in the ground 3 years, and you cut back all of that, it's not going to be the same kind of plant like your salvias, because the salvia has all these dormant buds that flush out. This does not. It may have a few, hence when you cut them back and they're really leggy and, I mean, woody like that, it's rare that they're going to come back. So do it early. If the plant starts looking leggy, I would definitely deadhead all the flowers on it. It's a lot of work if you have a lot of lavenders out there just trimming off the dead flowers. That'll keep it blooming longer and keep the plant a little more compact. If you let it go, what happens is the energy changes. It's from reproductive state. When you're trimming off the dead flowers, you're kind of halting that reproductive state of the plant. And you're allowing it to continue to bloom. If you let it go beyond the bloom, it starts to grow foliage and it starts to grow limbs and it starts to grow out. Just keep your eye on it, and when you think it needs to be trimmed, you probably are right, it should be taken back. If you wait too long, it does not do well. Almost all of them don't. Yes?
Is the bluebeard a salvia?
Bluebeard? Sounds like an iris to me. There's an iris called a blue-bearded iris. And there could be a bluebeard lavender. There's over 300 cultivars of lavenders. I planted 5 types of lavender this year. These are 5 I planted in my property. They all died but one. And I tried an experiment because I had clients who would say, my lavenders are dying. What's going on? Every job that I planted or every person that I knew who had lavender lost their lavender this year. We don't know why. We don't know if it was the nursery had used soil that maybe had pathogens in it, or maybe it was the cultivar, or maybe there was just, something in the soil we didn't know about. I still don't know what happened. But I planted French lavender, sweet lavender, Goodwin Creek lavender, Headcoat lavender, and Spanish lavender. The one that lived is the one I don't like at all. It's like my least favorite lavender, which is the French lavender. It's very compact. I like to plant a little more informal gardens that flows in the breeze. Sweet lavender is my favorite. It grows this tall. The flowers are this tall. The plant remains about this tall. It produces these long tassels that blow in the breeze. Very beautiful. It's a purple flower. If you can get the sweet lavender to grow, it needs full sun, it needs well-drained soil. Do not overwater, and do not pile the mulch up at the base of the plant. I didn't do any of that. I think what happened was my soil might have been a little lacking, and I might have had too much clay where I planted the sweet lavender, hence why it died. Do not overwater. Do not pile your mulch beneath your lavenders, and do not put it in soil that is all clay. It needs to have it drained. It's a Mediterranean plant. Some of them are from the subtropics, Central America. But do your research on your lavenders. If blue, what'd you call it again? Blue what? Bluebeard? I can go under lavender here, and
I thought it was a salvia.
there's a red lip salvia.
Are you saying that we should plant them in like a cactus soil?
Yes.
I don't think it's a lavender.
Okay. There are, let's see what they say here. There's over 200 cultivars. Since lavenders have been in cultivation for centuries, and some species cross in nature by themselves without us even having. So if you planted 5 lavenders in your yard, and bees are pollinating, and the wind blows the pollen around, and the seed becomes vital, then what may happen, that seed may become a cross between a French lavender and a sweet lavender. And so the names are often confused. Some of the variety names that follow may not agree with those on the nursery labels. So I may buy it from the nursery, it says sweet lavender, and it may be actually a cross between 2 of the lavenders that the nursery didn't know about. So unless you're growing them yourself or you know exactly what you want, sometimes I just go and you can visually see. Right now, all I know is the French lavender has done the best, and it's still living in my garden. And I don't like it. I shouldn't say that. I'll go home and it'll probably be dead now.
Yeah, they hear those things.
So anyway, salvias. But good question on the lavenders. There's so many types of cultivars of lavender. The artemisias. This are also another shrub that can be used here in the landscaping. I won't go into too much about it. It really is noted for its foliage, silvery gray. Again, you see sort of a common thread. I'm using grays and purples. I'm not adverse to yellows and oranges and reds. I did say that the Leonotis is another one of my favorites. So the Leonotis, again, cut that back as well. Rosemary does great in the landscaping. By the way, if you have deer, raccoons, any kind of rodents through your garden, it's always a good idea to plant rosemary, plant sages, lavenders, oregano, anything that has a real emollient smell to it, the foliage, where all you have to do is brush by it and it sort of releases those oils in the air. They don't like it.
Does that work for squirrels?
Probably not. Somehow or another squirrels will probably get to whatever they need to get to.
What about possum?
A cat would be great for a squirrel, and a possum. But no, deer and raccoons definitely don't like that, and I found that out when I worked at Descanso Gardens. We just put them in big pots throughout the garden, and they stayed away to the most extent. But when you're hungry, I guess the smell of lavender is going to not hinder you from eating, so. But it does help. Oregano, things of that sort, too.
Oregano, rosemary.
Oregano, rosemary. Anything that
Thyme?
smells, yeah, thyme, anything that has a real pungent smell. Mexican sunflower. Okay, there's a common name. What do you think when you say, when I say Mexican sunflower, what comes to your, what do you visualize? Sunflower. What do you visualize? Sunflower? And anyone else? Any other kind of different variation? Yes, kinda, sorta, maybe. It has a tiny little yellow flower. It's a composite like a sunflower, but it's very small. It's a shrub that gets this tall by this wide. Mexican sunflower is the common name because someone named it that and it's just stuck. It's not related to sunflower at all. It's called, let's see if I can pronounce this name, I remember the name of this. It's Tagetes, T-A-G-A-T-E-S. It's related to marigold. Tagetes lemonii. Because it smells like lemon, and you know, marigolds, when you crush the leaves, how that smells really pungent. The Mexican marigold, Mexican sunflower, or the Tagetes lemonii is incredibly, the wind has to blow that, and you can just smell that in the garden. That is great to keep animals out of your garden because it really is powerful. I happen to like the smell of that. Most people run because it is very powerful. It's like marigold smell triple.
Would you spell the Tagetes?
T-A-G-A-T-E-S.
T-A-G-A-T-E-S.
Second word is lemonii, L-E-M-O-N-I-I. And let me just double check. I like to go to the nursery and just run my hands through the shrub like this and then watch people behind me go, what is that smell? It's that, I love it. I love the smell of it.
Do you know of any plants that smell like cinnamon?
Cinnamon?
Yeah. We were in Claremont and I kept smelling cinnamon when we were outside. I thought maybe there was a plant.
Was someone making like hot tea or something?
Maybe.
You know, it's interesting when you're out of the environment and the things that we smell and how it reminds us of certain things. It could be a combination of things that blended that.
Right.
Or maybe there is a plant that I don't know about that does have that kind of a smell to it. We don't know if it was a flower maybe, or if it was foliage, or if it was a combination.
There were so many things out.
Right?
So it's hard to tell.
You ever go, I mean, one of the things I like to do is when I leave LA and I go out to the country somewhere, not Palm Springs, but the country, back east, and walk in the woods and you can smell the earth. We don't smell the earth here, but you can walk in the woods and you can smell the decaying of the leaves and you can smell the pine needles beneath your feet. All of that is lost here. So we have to rely on things like I was just mentioning, these plants that are really volatile in their fragrance. But yes, for some reason I was just thinking of taking a trip in the woods somewhere. Okay, Tagetes, let's see, we have, here it is. Okay, wow, well, Tagetes is marigold, so I'm going to look up lemonii. Okay. Lemonii is also called a copper canyon daisy, in addition to Mexican marigold. And it's here. It says right here, leaves are strongly fragrant when brushed against or rubbed. Hence why I like to be doing that in the nursery. They smell like a blend of marigold, mint, and lemon. I think it's phenomenal. It smells amazing.
So then mint would be another one that the raccoons don't like.
Correct. The golden orange flowers are carried out at branch ends sporadically all year round. And you can also cut it back to the ground when it gets really leggy. Cut it back to about a foot. So you're exposing all those branches you just cut to the sunlight getting in there and initiating new growth. Damage by frost can happen, so if you live in a really cold microclimate and you know you might get frost, throw a sheet over that if you've got them because it will kill them back. Lemonii, and it's, I'm sorry, the name, it's L-E-M-M-O-N-I-I. And Tagetes is T-A-G-E-T-E-S.
Yeah.
I stand corrected. Full sun, drought tolerant, but I love it. It's a great plant. It gets huge. So if you're going to put it in your landscaping, put it back towards the house, not towards the front, because it will hide whatever's behind there. And give it enough room to grow, because you don't want to have to trim this. It's kind of a globe-shaped shrub, and it looks great when it's in full bloom. So it goes 5 feet wide. If you're doing lavenders or you're doing this Salvia clevelandii and this Leonodes, you have the yellow, the orange, and the blue. Wow, that's a big statement. beautiful and it would bloom all summer for you, attracting butterflies, hummingbirds, all the things that we want to bring into our garden to help create a healthy environment. And they're all drought tolerant, and they're inexpensive plants. A 5-gallon Leonidas, a 5-gallon Salvia, a 5-gallon Tagades will probably run you about anywhere between $12 to $18 a plant. You only need one, depending on how big your property is. Because again, they get 5 feet wide, and if you've got 3 plants that grow 5 feet wide, that's 15 feet in linear width. And your property's 30, you've taken up half your property in just 3 plants. So I like to suggest let the plants be a plant and don't get, I used to love, okay, I'll tell you what I did. When I first moved to LA 10 years ago, I wasn't used to these plants, a lot of the way they grew, and I had to learn the hard way. So coming from the tropics, back east, I love planting because I want to see big instant gratification. Got a phone call about 4 months after I did this design for a client. Can you come by? I can't find my sidewalk. So everything we plant, because she wanted and I wanted instant gratification, just give it time, because you don't want to have to go in and prune, transplant, and remove things out. You just want to let them grow in naturally. And it doesn't take long, particularly now we're going into the better time of year when we've got growing conditions coming up with the rain and hopefully tomorrow.